So,
Yes.
professor of sociology at the University of Maryland, Dr. Marsh was previously a postdoctoral scholar at the Carolina Population Center at the University of North Carolina. She was also a visiting researcher at the University of Southern California and Fulbright scholar in South Africa at the University of Witwatersrand and the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Marsh's area of expertise are the Black middle class, demography, racial residential segregation, and education. And today she is virtually with us to present the Love Jones Cohort, examining the lifestyle of those single and living alone in the Black middle class. So thank you so much for being with us, Dr. March, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I do apologize that I cannot be there in person. I would have really wanted to be there. But all right, so listen, I wish that I was there. I really like, oh, I closed it, so I can't see if I'm going too fast. Simon, let me know if I'm going too fast. So I like audience participation. I like to engage the audience when I can in conversation. I wish I was there with you, but I'm not. But I still think we can do a little bit of audience participation. Today, I really want to talk about people that are single and living alone in the Black middle class. But before I get there, I want us to think about like who we're actually talking about. So I want you to like kind of raise your hand in your office, on Zoom, wherever you are in the audience. If you know somebody that's single, this can include yourself. Raise your hand if you know somebody that is single and is living alone. Raise your hand if you know somebody that's single, living alone, and is college educated. Raise your hand if you know somebody that's single, living alone, college educated, and making good money. Raise your hand if you know somebody single, living alone, college educated, making good money, and working. Lastly, raise your hand if you know somebody that's single, living alone, college educated, making good money, working, and is a homeowner. 9 out of 10 times when I say that, if not all of the hands, a lot of hands go up in the room. And this is who I'm trying to capture in the work that I do in the Love Jones Cohort, the book. But I think it's really important for you to kind of let you know exactly who I'm talking about. And I started this work on a quantitative level, but then I quickly moved to a qualitative level. And one of the things I say in the book, and I stand by this, I said that I wanted to put metaphorical meat on the numeric bones that I built the first part of my academic career. As a demographer, I can give you the trends, I can give you the numbers, I can crunch the best statistics out there. But it's another conversation to actually talk to people that are in this group, to learn more about them and think about them in more positive kind of ways. I want to pause and I want to say this because this is really important to me, and I say it wherever I go. One of the reasons why I'm writing this book is because I wrote the book, is because I'm trying to destigmatize singlehood. You have so many people that will be in relationships that are abusive, toxic, unfulfilling, and unrewarding simply because they don't want to hold the title of single. So my ministry and my work is to really get us to think about singlehood in a different way. So I'm trying to say, instead of asking, in the States in particular, why aren't professional Black women getting married? I want to talk about what singles are doing. And so that's where I'm trying to insert myself into the conversation. But I have a very unique group that I'm looking at. I'm looking at people that are aged 25 to 54. They're single, have never been married. And that's important because I think it could be a slightly different conversation for those that are returning back to singlehood. And in fact, I left a lot of questions unanswered that I hope graduate students pick up and carry the conversation forward. In my quantitative work, you may or may not be living alone. You could be living with someone else, but it has to be a non-romantic partner, not in a romantic relationship. And also in the quantitative work, I wanted to know if you were child free in the sense that there weren't children in your household. I was using the US Census Bureau data, and I really wasn't able to measure the fertility. I was just able to measure I wasn't trying to measure fertility. I wanted to see if people children were or were not in the household. This is also something that's really important to me as a scholar. There's a great book out there called Going Solo by Eric Klinenberg. And I appreciate the work. My work that's foundational for my own work. But I also have to understand that we can't have a conversation about singlehood without including race in the conversation. Because once you add race to the conversation, it becomes a more nuanced conversation. So one of the things I, Chris Marsh, as a scholar had to do is I had to decide whether or not I wanted to call this group solo, kind of drawing from Eric Kleinenberg, or if I wanted to come up with a slightly different name that still suggests single, but also adds race into the conversation. So I decided to come up with the term SALA. So I say SALA means single and living alone. And when I say that, I'm talking about all of these parameters. So again, this is some of the quantitative work that I did, which I think is important to contextualize the conversation before we flip to some of the qualitative work. So one of the other things that's really important to me, I don't know that I understand the Canadian context all that well, but I do understand the US context. And one of the things I have decided as a full professor now, and I'm over the age of 50, so you know what that means, I decided that I'm not going to do interracial comparison in my work anymore. When we tend to do interracial comparison, what we do in America is we often make whites the referent group or the gold standard. And I, Chris Marsh, as a scholar, said I'm drawing a line in the sand, and I'm doing intra-racial comparison because I would argue there's enough variation in Black America where I don't have to compare Blacks to other racial and ethnic groups. So now that I've said that profound statement, I'm going to contradict myself in plain sight. Just for illustration purposes, I want us to look at the trends for those that are never married between the ages of 25 to 64 from 1880 into 2019. You can clearly see that Blacks dominate the category and are worthy of having their own separate conversation. For maybe the economists in the room, I'm not sure what happened between 1950 and 1960 where you have that crossover, but if you have some speculations, I'd love to hear it. So this is the only interracial comparison that I really want to do. So here's where I kind of came to this conversation. So as a graduate student, there was this argument in the Black middle class literature. Oh, I want to say this too. In America, I don't know about the Canadian context, and I apologize. But in America, there's a lot of scholars who spend their entire academic career, who sometimes don't even look like me, talking about poor Black Americans. And I decided early on in my academic career, I did not, and I say this everywhere I go, and if you get it, you get it, and if you don't, you don't. But I decided early on, I did not want to pimp the poor to make my academic career. There is a Black middle class in spite of all the isms in America. And so I, as a scholar, wanted to have more conversation around the Black middle class. So as I'm studying the Black middle class in graduate school, there's a subtle argument in the literature on the Black middle class. And they're saying that because we're seeing a decrease in married couple households, there's also a decrease in the Black middle class. And I'm suggesting that there's maybe an alternative view that we need to consider. And we're seeing a rise in people that are SALA. We see a decrease in married couple households, but we're also seeing an increase in the Black middle class. So what we're seeing is we're seeing a demographic shift in the Black middle class away from married couples to young Black professionals who aren't married and don't have any children. So I wanted to tease that out in a quantitative kind of sense. So I built this Black middle class index, and there's just quick 4 variables that fall into the index: education, wealth, occupation, and income. If you met all 4 criteria on the Black middle class index, you would be considered middle class. If you didn't, you wouldn't be considered middle class. It's funny because we can talk about the index more if you want in the Q&A. But what is interesting about this is that people often challenge me and say, well, why do you have wealth? And because I'm using US Census Bureau data, I'm using homeownership as a proxy for wealth. And it's not a value judgment, but here's what I know. In the American literature in particular, it talks about how there's a fragility in the Black middle class, how they're 1 or 2 paychecks away from poverty. So if you have a global pandemic, i.e. COVID, the Black middle class is going to slip out of middle class, and they're going to fall into like a slightly lower class. But it wasn't really wealth that was the hardest variable to load on the index. It really was education. So anyways, so we use this index, and if we use this index and we look at the data in 1980, we can see that only 6% are Black middle class households. If we look at 2010, we see that it's 13%. In the book, I updated the numbers to, I think, 2020. And so it is important that you understand, it is important to say that although, again, Black middle class households are a smaller pie of all of Black American households, it still is a pie, a portion of the pie, and worth being discussed and worth having conversation about. So here's where I look at the percent distribution of Black household types, Black middle class household. households, various household types. There's two things I want to draw your attention to: the white bars and the black bars. The white bars are married couples with a child, and the black bars are the people that are single and living alone. Excuse me. And if you can notice, you can see that married couple households are decreasing from one decade to the next. And you can see that single and living alone households are increasing from one decade to the next. So the conversation becomes, if the second largest household type in the Black middle class are single and living alone, if the second largest household type for redundancy purposes are single and living alone, how and in what ways will the Black middle class be able to reproduce itself? If we draw from the social science literature, class status is usually transferred from parent to child. If the second largest household type in the Black middle class are single and living alone, don't have a partner, don't have children, how and in what ways will the Black middle class be able to reproduce themselves? That's a conversation that I need to have more on a qualitative level. So that kind of led me to start out quantitative, but slowly move to the qualitative level. If we look at more current data, look at people that are single and living alone, we can see from 1980 into 2014, they are increasing and or sustaining the share of the middle class households. If we juxtapose again the gold standard, air quotes, or this heteronormal mother, father, 2.5 children, we can see that there's a decrease in married couple households, and there's an increase in people that are single and living alone. It also becomes a really interesting conversation of, will there be a crossover? Will single and living alone be the largest household type in the Black middle class? All of that is to be determined, so stay tuned. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the context for the quantitative work and how the quantitative work laid the groundwork for the qualitative work that I want to do. But here's what's kind of interesting and funny. People often ask me why the title, the Love Jones Cohort, for my book. And so if we draw from the American context, if we were to think of like the quintessential Black middle class family or Black upper class family, we might often think about the Cosbys on the Huxtables on the Cosby Show. You have a successful father, a successful mother, and you have 5 adorable children. And so this was like this heteronormal Black middle class family. But there was a movie that was called Love Jones that came out about 25 or 26 years ago. And in the demographics of the characters, a lot of them were young professionals, weren't married, didn't have any children, and were trying to figure out their lives. And so for me, I really wanted to draw on the characters from the Love Jones. And then I wanted to draw from pop culture and use the movie Love Jones. And I also wanted to draw from my quantitative work as a demographer and put cohort into the title because I wanted people that don't have a formal education, I wanted them to be able to learn a new term. So that's how I came up with the term, the Love Jones Cohort, which is really interesting because if you write a really interesting book, your colleagues will just buy your book just because. One of my colleagues, who's a criminologist, won the Stockholm Prize. He said, I saw your book in the bookstore. I didn't know what the title meant, so I bought it. So just word of wisdom. Please write a book that has a really interesting title and people will buy it simply because of the title. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about the book. Like I said before, the book really is a love letter to those that are single and living alone. I was tired of having this deficit model conversation, like why aren't single Black folks getting married? Instead of that, I wanted to know what they were doing as their single status. So there's kind of 3 theoretical frameworks that I drew from. The first one is stratification economics, and it offers a structural rather than a behavioral explanation for economic inequality between groups. And for me, it's important that we have a structural conversation about singlehood as opposed to an individual conversation about singlehood. Let me tell you why I think that that's really important. If we leave it at the individual level, people will think I'm too fat, I'm not fat enough, I'm too skinny, I'm not tall enough, my hair's too short, my hair's too long, my hair's too curly. There could be a plethora of reasons as to why they're single. But we have to understand, especially when we're talking about Black America, we have to understand how structural forces constrain our personal choices. Let me give you a really quick example. If I, Chris Marsh, want to marry another Black heterosexual man who has a PhD, owns his own home, and has estate planning, he's simply not there. So whether or not I'm dating now by choice or by force, we have to understand that my dating pool is constrained. And so it's important that we offer a structural explanation for singlehood and not just leave it at the individual level. I also want to think about intersectionality. So just in real basic kind of terms, I'm sure we all know this, but we need to think about like these oppressive identities that work together, all together at the same time for people's experiences. So it's my race, it's my class, it's my gender, it's all of these things. It's funny because one of the arguments that I make in the book, and I thought I was going to get a lot of pushback, and I did not. I was saying that singlehood needs to be one of these identities that we think about in this intersectionality. So it's race, it's class, it's gender, it's singlehood. And I thought I was going to get pushback, and I really don't get pushback. I will tell you where I get pushback. And then lastly, I wanted to think about this idea of respectability politics. And this theory kind of suggests that Black people need to conform to a certain mainstream behavior, appearances, and manners in order to benefit from being discriminated against in the larger society, often white society. And sometimes Black people can engage in respectability politics against other Black people. So I was curious to know like how respectability politics played into this conversation of being single and living alone. So that's kind of like the basic theoretical framework. I'm not going to tell you all everything about the book because I really do want you to get the book. And this is just another little tidbit of information for those that may not know. The book is published with Cambridge University Press. I have a lot of colleagues and friends, and nobody told me this. I appreciate Cambridge, but Cambridge gets 90% of each book that I sell. The book is $30, so I only get $3 US. So I cannot give you everything in the book. I'm going to give you some teasers and hope that you buy the book so I can get $3 by the time this conversation is over. But let's talk about what's in the book. One of the things I talk about in the very beginning of the book is the debate on how we define the Black middle class. There's been scholarly discussion, and I'm happy for this discussion, so it'll keep me working on how we define the Black middle class. And should there be a unique Black middle class definition, or should we just have a middle class definition? So really great discussion about the debates around how we define the Black middle class. And then I wanted to particularly know how the Love Jones cohort defined the Black middle class, because I was curious to pick up whether or not they had this heteronormative idea that it needs to be a mother, father, or two mothers and a child and a Black picket fence. So I wanted to really talk to the Love Jones cohort about how they define the Black middle class. Chapter 3 is really interesting because I talk about the Black middle class and their middle class. I talk to the Love Jones cohort, excuse me, and their Black middle class identity, and like what kind of responsibility do they have to the larger Black community. One of the things that I did in the book is that I wrote a lot of footnotes. It's funny because my editor said, Dr. Marsh, try to keep your footnotes to a minimum. When you find yourself going off on a tangent, put it in a footnote, but please keep it to a minimum. I have 120 footnotes because I had a lot of tangents I wanted to go off on. Right there in that chapter, a lot of the Love Jones cohort talked about W.E.B. Du Bois's idea of the talented 10th. And then I talked about how someone else was writing around the exact same time as W.E. Du Bois about the talented 10th. He pushed back against his own idea. But a lot of people, there was another scholar who was writing the exact same time as W.E.B. Du Bois. And the argument is that if you improve the life chances of Black women, you'll improve the life chances of everyone. And that woman was Anna Julia Cooper. Many people don't know who Anna Julia Cooper is because they were gatekeepers that were preventing her work from her work being published. And the argument is that W.E.B. Du Bois was actually a gatekeeper that prevented her work from being published. So although that doesn't directly relate to singlehood, it's an important conversation, and it'll be in the footnotes when you read the footnotes of the book. One of the things I wanted to talk about is what do we know about the rise of never married Black singles? What do we have to say about how Black people marry, value or don't value marriage? What does the sex ratio imbalance have to do with it? What does economic freedom have to do with it? So some of the theories that are out there, I try to tackle in chapter 4 and really have the people in the Love Jones cohort help me think through why the rise of never married singles. Then I have a whole chapter on whether or not you're single by choice, circumstance, or both. I'm just going to go ahead and give you a spoiler alert. It is usually, in most cases, it's an amalgamation of both. But in that chapter, again, I'm saying whether or not it's choice, circumstance, we have to understand that there's a structural force that is constraining your dating pool. So I try to really push back on that conversation and make sure we bring it back to a structural conversation. In chapter 6, we talk about the lifestyle, the ebbs and flows of being single and living alone. And freedom is something that comes up repeatedly in that section. Also, food comes up a lot in that section. I also want to talk about intergenerational mobility and dissemination of wealth. Like I said earlier, I think I mentioned this, that all of the people that I interviewed had some assets, whether that was a home, whether or not that was a business. Some people have precious metals and gold. I have aspirational goals now. But I wanted to know how they were going to disseminate their wealth, especially if they did not have children. I also wanted to know how they thought about buying homes and how they thought about accumulating wealth. If we think of like just the standard life course conversation, you go to college, you get married, you have children, you buy a house, however that goes. The Love Jones cohort they have jumped a couple of steps on the life course. And so how do they think about buying a home? When do they think about buying a home? And what do they do with the assets that they have? I also really wanted to have a great conversation, a robust conversation about neighborhood decisions and interactions. I've done a lot of work on residential segregation, and we know a lot about how married couple households move to certain areas for their children, for schools, and so on and so forth. The assumption is that single folks move to a place where there's not a lot of nightlife or a social environment. I really wanted to know how SALAs thought about neighborhood choices and where they chose to live. And then lastly, co-authored with a mentor, now colleague at UCLA, I wanted to look at the health, mental well-being, and coping strategies of those that are single and living alone. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all these chapters, but there are two things I want to focus on. I want to focus on lifestyle, and I want to focus on well-being. So a little bit more about the qualitative data. I collected the data in the summer of 2015. We recruited in the Maryland, Virginia, DC area of the United States. Interviews lasted about an hour. Some interviews were 60 minutes, 45 minutes, some were 3.5 hours. The location varied. Most of the interviews either happened at the university or it happened at the respondents' homes. We did compensate. We paid each respondent $15 to be a part of the study. We also used a snowball sample. At the end of our interview protocol, we asked the Love Jones cohort if they could recommend 5 other people that fit the demographics. And then we had racial and gender parity where possible. We had the young men interview young men, and we had women interview the women. We didn't have anybody that identified as non-binary in the sample in 2015. We settled on 62 respondents. Majority of them were women, but there were some men in the group. And I had to really grapple with whether or not I wanted to write a book about Black women, and I could have because they did dominate the category. But there were single Black men in the group, but I did not want to ignore them and I didn't want to discount them. So both men and women are in the book. And people often get that wrong. I think it's just women. No, there are men in the book too. And I interviewed 75 respondents. Please ask me how we settled on 62 if you get a chance to ask in the Q&A, but we settled on 62. The age range was 25 to 64. We really wanted to look at those people that were post-college and those that were just about at the retirement level. Unfortunately, majority of our respondents were on the younger age. The average age was just under 40. We interviewed people that were in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. That is important because I don't know how this study would play out if I did it in Los Angeles, California, where I am now. I don't know if the data would be the same. So I've left a whole bunch of questions unanswered. Also, everybody in the studies defined themselves as middle class. All of them had never been married. Really funny story. We had one interview, we're like 45 or 50 minutes in, and one young woman said, well, I was married, but my ex-husband's considered dead to me, so I'm never married. I'm like, it doesn't quite work like that. So we had to exclude them. We also want people who have never had any children. And this was really important because there were some people who had children and said, well, my child is a money grubbing leech. So at 18, they're not getting anything else. But you're able to make that decision. I want people who don't have children and what kind of decisions do they make? And over 50% of them or half of them had over $100,000 worth of wealth. And that was really wrapped up in their home. Okay, so here is just a few of the select questions that we asked the Love Jones cohort. Do you think your single and living alone status affects your health? And if so, in what ways? What does single and living alone mean to you? And what, if any, are the negative and positive aspects of being a SALA? So I'm only going to focus on 2 things for the remainder of my presentation, and that's on friendship and that's on situational loneliness. So here we draw from Kelsey. Kelsey works in investment and in her free time likes to travel as much as she can, and she also enjoys working out. So thinking about this idea of friends, Kelsey discussed living alone and highlighted the benefits of socializing with friends. Just because you live alone doesn't mean you're always alone. Because you have friends, you can always go out with them, invite them over, or you can go to their house. So the assumption is just because the assumption sometimes might be just because you're solid, that means you don't have like a network. You have a network, you just don't have a network directly in your house. You're in the solitude of your own home. Then we have Nancy. Nancy's estimated age is about 43 and is a program manager. During Nancy's spare time, she likes to garden, write for a local newspaper, and really enjoys traveling the world. Nancy said, at the time, this is when she was living in college. I think it was college. My friends, we lived in DC. We chose to live near each other so we could all just be within a 5-mile radius if something happened. We all lived in the same radius of about 10 miles. So for Nancy, although she was a SALA and she lived alone, her friends were in close proximity to her in case something were to happen. So here's what's really important about this idea of singlehood. Singlehood is something that comes, pardon me, friendship is something that comes up over and over and over again. And the respondents have said that friendships play a central role in how they navigate their singleness. There was a slight gender difference. So the Black women in particular, they had their non-romantic nurturing friendships, their friends. And they had their sister circles, their sororities, their go-out girlfriends, all that kind of great stuff. And it was working well for them and really helped them navigate their singlehood life. The Black men, not so much to the same degree. And I'm hoping we can normalize non-romantic nurturing relationships among other men, Black men. Because the Black men sometimes kind of said, well, I'm afraid to kind of show my emotions to another Black man because I may thought of as being gay, I may thought of as being soft. But they did talk about, the women definitely talked about friends, and the Black men talked about friends, but not to the same level of intimacy that the Black women talked about friends. So thinking about friends and think about how friends help the Love Jones cohort navigate their singleness, situational loneliness is something that also came up. And I'm really happy that it came up as situational loneliness because there's a lot of suggestion out there that people that are single and living alone, they're depressed, they're upset, they go to work and they pull the covers up over their head and then they cry themselves to sleep and they're in the fetal position, and all of that just really doesn't play out in the respondents. One of the things they do talk about is they do talk about loneliness, but they talk about it as a very situational, not a long-term type of loneliness. So if we think of like different levels of loneliness, you have like emotional loneliness where you have a lack of like these deep quality connections. Then you have this kind of social loneliness where you lack a wide circle of friends and acquaintances. And then I'm argued that where you have this situational loneliness, it's bouts of loneliness, but it ebbs and flows and it's only over short periods of time. And the intensity ranges from mild to moderate, but it never gets to the point of it's like very, very, very intense. And it just happens inconsistently and it's very temporary. And here's what is interesting about this. Let's think about two cases where you could possibly see this happen in maybe Valentine's Day, right? So on February 14th, you might have like people in the Love Jones cohort that might have situational loneliness, or on New Year's Eve when you're always supposed to have somebody to kiss. You then think about situational loneliness. But the Love Jones cohort talked about how friends help them navigate through their situational loneliness. So Lillian, who's 37, did not have any hobbies at the time, doesn't have time for hobbies, and dedicates her time to work. We know that story all too well, and spends all of her time running her public relations business. She said, if I have a bad head cold, I have to figure it out. How to get better, how to get medication. Thank God for Instacart and other delivery services. Now I can outsource my groceries and that kind of stuff. So Lillian kind of talked about how there might be this situational loneliness when they're sick. They have to rely on someone to take care of them. And in some cases, it's this kind of delivery service that just takes care of them. Alex works as an analyst in a public school system. In her free time, she loves to write, read, and illustrate, and she really likes to write adult fiction. Alex said, it's not as bad as people think. A lot of people assume that because I'm alone, that I automatically want company. That's not always the case. Alex goes on to say, but when it is the case, I can have friends come over if I really am lonely. So there is a sense of loneliness, but it's not like this habitual, intense, oh my gosh, I'm in the fetal position, I can't get out of bed. Joseph, 31, who is a software specialist, likes to research new information in his spare time and enjoys reading books and or working on his computer. And Joshua said, Joseph, pardon me, said, you break away from your childhood friends. I'm in a different city, so I'm not around people I grew up with. It's hard to trust people and develop relationships. One of the things that has been consistent since I've written the book, and I have had conversations on podcasts, book talks about this book, one of the questions that I constantly get is, how do you make friends later in life? And that is a legit question that we as scholars need to tackle and need to have a conversation around. I think I've come up with one way to kind of think through that. And if you get a chance, you can ask me in the Q&A. Okay, so two findings I just really wanted to highlight. Friends play a central role in the lifestyle of those that are single and living alone. There is loneliness, but it tends to be more situational. It's short term, it ebbs and flows, and it's not debilitating or constant. So here are some broader conclusions I want to talk about with the book before I leave you with a couple of questions. Overall, the Love Jones cohort saw their singleness as positive but situational. Two, like I said before, one of the things that has come up in conversation is like aging and how we make friends later in life, which is interesting, right? Because you got all of these great dating sources and dating apps and so on and so forth. Where are the apps where you can just make friends? Whether or not it's by choice or circumstance, which in most cases it's an amalgamation of both. I didn't present that data, but the data is in the book. We have to understand there's structural forces that are constraining our personal choices. One of the things that I argue in the book is that I want to redefine family. If we look at the definition of family, the Census Bureau definition of family is someone that you're related to by blood, marriage, or adoption. So I, Chris Marsh, do not show up in the census data as a family. I'm single and living alone. I show up as a household. I do not show up as a family. And I am arguing that I should be a family of one. And if not a family of one, I think we need to have this conversation about augmented families. And what augmented families are is like, okay, if you have two non-romantic relationships, two friends, why can't they be recognized as a family and get the benefits of a family? If I were to give you like really three quick examples, like in America, we have like a Verizon service where we can get like a family discount on our phones. I only have one phone and it's only me, so I don't get that discount, the family discount. That's a benign example. Slightly more egregious. After a very long fall break, a very long semester, I want to go on vacation. Double occupancy is more expensive than single occupant. I got that wrong. Single occupancy is more expensive than double occupancy. The last one that's really egregious, I think everybody can probably shake their heads on it, is that there's a singlehood penalty built into the tax structure. There's a really great book by Dorothy Brown, The Whiteness of Wealth. And one of the things that Dorothy Brown argues is that everybody should file their taxes as singles. If we can't all file our taxes as singles, I want to be able to file my taxes as a Chris Marsh family, get my discount on my taxes as a Chris Marsh family. If you don't buy my family of one, which people push back hard on that, then I should be able to establish a family with one of my dearest girlfriends whose husband passed away. And so I know that some of my assets are going to go to her daughter anyway. So why can't we be recognized as a family? And my girlfriend already knows like my end of life like plans. My sister doesn't know, but my girlfriend does. So why can't we be recognized as a family? I think the term family is antiquated. And if we're not careful, I think the term family is discriminating in plain sight. So really quickly, I want to leave you with 6 quick questions. I'm going to open it up for Q&A. So thinking about the Love Jones cohort, thinking about people that are single and child-free, I just want us to ponder a few questions. Is it elitist to ask the Love Jones cohort, why are you single and child-free? If your question is based on the premise that having a spouse, partner, and children is the ultimate measure of success, then my answer is yes. Number 2, is it demeaning to ask the Love Jones cohort, why are you single and child-free? If in asking your question, the onus is placed solely at the boots of the cohort without consideration to structural forces and or agentic individual choice and preference, then my answer is yes. Number 3, is it insensitive to ask the Love Jones cohort, why are you single and child-free? If in your question, all other life accomplishments are ignored and or it is assumed their status is purely due to choice rather than out of necessity or circumstance, then my answer is yes. Number 4, is it discriminatory to ask the Love Jones cohort, why are you single and child-free? If comparable questions are not asked of married folks, such as why are you married, we often ask single folks, why are you single, but we don't ask married folks, why are you married? And or the question assumes that the dating practices and sex lives of the cohort should be open to public consumption, while discussion of the marital bed is taboo, then my answer is yes. Number 5, is it problematic to be uninformed how structural forces shape individual behavior before asking the Love Jones cohort, why are you single and child-free? If the question is based on the assumption that singleness is solely due to some form of personality deficit rather than individual choice, without any regard to structural impediments, then my answer is yes. And lastly, is it provoking attention within the Black middle class to ask the Love Jones cohort why are you single and child-free? If the assumption underlying your question is that only a certain household type is acceptable when it comes to membership of the Black middle class or being a valued member of society more generally, then my answer is a resounding yes. Really quick, here's all my contact information, my email address, my cell phone number, my social media, my website. This was supposed to be the original cover of my book. I was cleaning out this older woman's house, and the first cabinet I opened up and this magazine fell out. It was the Black middle class. And if you happen to notice in the lower left-hand corner, it says August 1973. I was born August 3rd, 1973. This was supposed to be the cover of my book. However, my book was 5 years late, and I didn't have time to get the copy edits from the magazine, so I decided to go with a different cover. The cover of the book is actually a quilt, and I'm really happy that I went with a quilt, because a quilt kind of talks about this understanding about friends and friendship and how friends play a central role in those that are single and living alone. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to open it up for conversation and discussion. And I hope I didn't talk too fast for y'all.
Thank you so much. Oops, sorry, we're changing screens. Thank you so much, Dr. Marsh. This was like one of the liveliest presentation ever, but definitely the liveliest like online presentation ever. So